I am both blessed and cursed with the kind of insufferable personality where I think I can do pretty much anything I put my mind to. So that's how we ended up here, where a year ago I couldn't knit at all, and now I've knit 13 projects and started self-drafting my own patterns. Let me take you through the how, why, and what of my first year of knitting. I've got to disclaim, I did learn to crochet as a kid, but it was something I did very occasionally. I could never knit. I did try to cast on a blue and purple fluffy scarf when I was about 10 years old, and I got 10 rows in and just called it quits. Since I've become a full-time working adult, I found that I was spending heaps of time on my phone. I wanted to find something else I could do that was a little bit more productive, and I thought, why don't I crochet a beanie? So I got started, and about halfway through, I realized this beanie just wasn't turning out the way I wanted it to look. I remember looking up how to make crochet beanies look more like standard beanies, or how to make crochet stitches look like knit stitches. I remember thinking, why can't I crochet a beanie that looks like a knit beanie? And then a second later I thought, why don't I just knit a beanie? So that was the moment everything clicked into place, and I picked up the needles for the first time since I was 10 years old and searched YouTube for how to cast on. Let's start with everything I knit this year in order and what I liked, loathed, and learned along the way. This is the first thing I cast on. And just as quickly as I started, I immediately discarded the idea of knitting that beanie, and I wanted to knit a jumper. When I started, I had absolutely no idea how to cast on, how to increase, decrease, do short rows, anything. I had no good understanding of how to make a well-fitting garment. So did I follow like an easy beginner tutorial or pattern? No. I created this pattern myself. I learned a lot about construction and fit, and I actually had a really great time. I do remember everyone thought I was pretty crazy knitting on a massive chunky jumper in the summertime, but it kept my mind focused on the cooler months ahead. Unfortunately, it ended up a little bit short. The tension is pretty bad, as you can see, and the yarn I chose, which was some vintage Icelandic yarn, is really quite rough against my skin, so I haven't worn it since I made it. But that was never the point. I just wanted to get the first big project out of the way and get the ball rolling and give myself some room to improve. I cast on this simple little neck scarf while I was knitting that first jumper. While this time I did use a pattern, I had a really tricky cast on, which meant I had to try it over many, many times. I think it would be easy to get discouraged by knitting this pattern, so I'm not sure I'd actually recommend this to a beginner looking back. After the cast on and learning how to do the I-cord, this is actually a pretty quick project. And although it did feel soft while I was knitting it, it doesn't feel soft against my neck. So I also don't wear this one. However, the motivation of finishing my first project spurred me on to carry on knitting that first jumper, which I did get done shortly thereafter. And at the same time as I knit this scarf and that jumper, I also decided to cast on some self-drafted Colourworks socks. I didn't use the right yarn, I had no idea what I was doing, and of course I knit half a sock and then tried it on and it didn't fit over my ankle. So although that was a complete failure and I frogged it and don't have it anymore, it did teach me that I really, really enjoyed knitting colourwork. So it's something I definitely want to do more of in the future. Now we're moving from summertime into the slightly cooler months, and I was ready to knit a jumper that I would actually love and wear. So my next project was ambitious and it started out pretty tough. This is what I call my Are We There Yet jumper. It's because it took me so long. Compared to that chunky jumper, which was knit at on pretty big needles, I think 7mm needles, this I knit using 3.75mm needles and sport weight yarn. It just took me so unbelievably long, and I had to start over a couple of times. So this jumper is constructed by starting at the back, with the back shoulders, and I actually got most of the way through the back shoulders before I realized that I was knitting it too loose of a tension. So I had to rip it out and redo it all. When I got to the front shoulders, I had miscounted the shoulder stitches. I decided to just add or decrease an extra stitch and just carry on. I tried out some new shorty wood needles for the first time. I realized pretty quickly that I hate knitting with wood needles. It was dragging and getting caught in the joint, and it was just driving me crazy. At some point I apparently sat on my needles and I snapped an interchangeable needle at the base, totally ruining the cable and the needle. By the end of the body, each round of the body was taking me about 10 minutes each. So this just took forever, and when I finished I almost didn't want to look at it. However, this turned out so incredible, and I wore this jumper all throughout winter this year. and I got so many compliments on it. And I love the fine gauge. It makes it a lot more wearable and a lot more easy to store. So happy with it. And I'm definitely going to knit something else at this gauge pretty shortly. We had yet another failed sock attempt. I actually designed some socks with a bit of ribbing detail, and I got my first pair of 9-inch circular needles. And I got partway down the cuff and realized that the pearl stitches in the ribbing were really making it very difficult to move the stitches around on the 9-inch needle. And it was driving me crazy, and I found it not very relaxing, so I frogged it and gave up. And that's something that I learned was, if I'm not enjoying a pattern, to just stop and move on. It's, it's a hobby, it's not work. So then we're moving on to my first gift. This is lovingly called the Buffhead Beanie, and I knit this for my dad. It was done so quickly, so moving from that jumper at the fine gauge to a pretty chunky beanie was awesome. I actually got this done in less than 48 hours. And I used my first ever pair of 16-inch circular needles, which were awesome. This was actually my first project fully completed in superwash yarn too, and I'd heard that it would expand a bit when it got wet, and I was surprised by how much it did. It's alright because my dad's got a big head, but now I know, and it's really reinforced the need to do a gauge swatch with superwash yarn to check how much it grows. After that, I was so inspired by the beanie for my dad that I knit myself a muscle burr inspired beanie. It's a 2-color reversible beanie, so you can flip it this way and flip the brim over. Made out of sock yarn, and it's got the circular start from a pinhole and the increases around in 4 quadrants, and it's double layered to get the circular effect. So you knit 1/2 in your colour A, you switch to colour B for the opposite brim, you switch back to colour A, and you switch back to colour B, and then you decrease to the other point, and you end up with a big tube, and you fold it inside itself. Now this actually went surprisingly quickly for a fingering weight project, and I think I was pretty much just excited to have a beanie, and that sped me along. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed reverse engineering a pattern that I had seen. And I got a heap of wear out of this in the winter time. I love having 2 colours in one beanie. It makes it really practical, especially if you're going travelling, so you can have a more standard colour and then a more exciting variegated colour, and you can just pick depending on the day. And I found this really great for knitting on the go. You could just hold it and pack it into a small bag. Great for on the bus. I was still on my beanie kick, so I decided to knit another gift beanie. And for this one, I did follow a pattern, and I tried out my first ever cables. I loved cables this first time I knit them. Something about getting excited to get to the next cable row really made the beanie go super quickly. And it was received really well as a gift because the cables make things look, 10 times more impressive than they actually are. This also helped teach me that I don't enjoy cabling with a cable needle. So I pretty much dove straight into cabling without a needle, which is a skill that I'm really glad to have learnt. I love this so much, I didn't want to give it away to my mum, but I did, so I'm going to knit myself one of these, definitely. So by the time we moved into winter, I wanted that big chunky jumper I had envisioned at the beginning of the year, and I started my self-drafted big zipper. That's this here, very much inspired by Petite Knit's zipper sweater pattern. Now this, again, took me forever. It was partially my own doing because I wanted to reverse engineer the pattern. So this is a double folded rib collar, and I actually had to completely knit it over a second time. It was just way too tight around my neck. I hadn't properly measured the stitches or accounted for the ribbing and how it would contract. And I just knew that if I kept going like that, I would never wear it because it would feel really tight. So I tried again, cast out more stitches, did it again. And then from there, it wasn't too bad. Unfortunately, I bought this yarn secondhand and it was discontinued. I love it. It feels so much like a towel or something. It's really, really soft and fluffy, but it is incredibly heavy. I also knit this to be quite oversized. And I realized about 2/3 of the way through that there was no way I had enough yarn, and I had to go onto eBay and source a reseller and just pay an extraordinary amount of money to get a few more balls of this yarn shipped to me. It ended up so heavy. I think this is over 800 grams, but it is quite a large jumper, and it ended up so cozy. So it's heavy, it's thick. It's oversized, and I'm really proud of the zipper, which was, a little bit daunting, but I did find it was actually quite easy, and I did it in a couple of hours. And it's something that now I know how to do. I feel like it's going to be really useful going forward. Another thing I didn't mention about this jumper was that I had something funny happen with the underarms. I don't know how, but I ended up with really big holes at the underarms. And after one wash, they've actually started to unravel. So I think I did something wrong when it came to switching colors of the underarm. And it also has happened at the split hem. So the yarn has actually come apart here. I'm not sure if I cut it or what's going on, but just something to keep in mind. This looks like it's going to be a pretty high maintenance jumper. Now my next project is pretty special. So this is actually the first project I'm going to show you that I haven't finished but do intend to. And this is the book club cardigan, which I cast on as part of my first ever knit along. As you can see, I haven't finished it yet, and I started this 6 months ago. I really enjoyed being part of this knit along. It was the first time I had a kind of community of people to talk with online and to motivate me to show my progress. And as you can see, this is a cabled, super detailed jumper. As always, I'm just going in assuming that I'll figure out how to do it. It was really great to see pictures of people as they went along, and to be able to get their advice as we went. There is another reason other than the huge amount of cables on this that it took so long, and that's because about halfway through the shoulders, I was knitting along one night and I looked down and there was a live wriggling moth larvae sitting on top of my knitting. So obviously I had to bag it up and bag everything else up and put it in the deep freezer and deal with that. So it meant I couldn't knit on this for a while and I lost a bit of momentum. Each row just takes so long now that I've joined the body in the round, and it's just going to take me a lot longer to finish. And as we came out of winter, I just wasn't feeling motivated to work on it. I also realized, similar to the last project with this yarn, I had ordered some yarn secondhand, and this comes from the US, and I'm definitely not going to have enough for the project. So another thing about this particular pattern is that the yarn estimations were a little bit under, and I had even less than they suggested. So I've had to think a little bit about what I'm going to do. This is intended to be a cardigan, but I'm probably going to knit it into just a drop shoulder vest and leave it there. So I've put this aside for now, and I'm going to pick it back up when the weather gets cooler again. I'm definitely excited to finish this, and it's something I'm going to love to wear. Towards the end of winter, I resolved to finally tackle my sock demons. I chose to use pattern this time, and I chose Summer Lee's SOS basic sock pattern, and I loved it. It's really well explained for people who maybe have never knit a sock before. There's lots of pictures, and I found it super easy. This was another gift that I was making for my boyfriend, and that meant the socks were really big. So these did take quite a lot of time. So the first sock took me a few weeks, I think, maybe 3 weeks. And then the last sock, I only had a week to work on for his birthday. So I just knit through it in a week, so it can be done. One thing these socks did teach me was that those 9-inch circular needles are not really my favorite for knitting socks. Maybe the foot or the leg where there's just plain stockinette, but definitely no pearls. But I did really enjoy switching to magic loop knitting on a really long cable. I bought my first pair of Xiaogu needles and I love them. I realized I love sharp needles, and so that made these way more enjoyable. And also the stitches are less likely to pop off the needle, I find, when you're using a long cable instead of a 9-inch circular. So yeah, the socks turned out awesome, and my boyfriend actually loved them as a gift. The only thing is that he says they feel too special to wear, so he doesn't wear them particularly often. So I'm going to knit him a few more pairs so he feels like he has some to rotate through. And we have another whip. So in the midst of winter, I decided to cast on my first ever pair of gloves. I'm calling these the Bearable Mornings gloves because I live somewhere where it's very cold in the morning and difficult to get out and get my cast started. I also had some fingering weight yarn that I picked up that was not sock yarn, so this is just 100% merino, and I wasn't sure what to do with it, but I feel like gloves are the perfect solution. I wanted to learn how to separate each of these fingers, and I actually found it really quite fiddly. It was quite tricky to learn. It's a good skill to have learned. I learned the cable cast on during this project, And I love that I can make gloves that fit my hands perfectly. But this is another case of I got through one and then I had second glove syndrome. And by that time, the weather was starting to warm up and I just didn't want to finish them. So I've put these aside alongside my book club cardigan, and I'm going to pick them back up again when the weather cools down. And like I said, the weather did warm up shortly after that. And so I got started into my Christmas gift knitting. I made sure to start really early this year because I intended to knit all of my immediate family members their Christmas gifts. So this was the first one I started with. If you are a member of my immediate family, stop watching. This was yet another basic beanie. I love beanies. I think I'm always going to love knitting beanies. I've done this one for my brother-in-law in black, his favorite color. And there's not much to add. I did a little colorwork stripe. I used superwash yarn again, and I love how soft it is, but I also love that I'm going to be able to gift it to someone without them having to worry about washing instructions. Then we moved on to another gift knit in my pile of knits. These are another self-drafted sock. They're inspired by the Summerlee basic sock pattern, but this is actually DK weight yarn. I've held a fingering weight double, so I had to do a little bit of my own swatching and measuring to figure out the sizing. These are for my dad, so I've made them pretty big, and they are in a 3x1 rib, so I wasn't too worried about getting the sizing exactly perfect. These are super thick, I would call them hiking socks. They're really rustic. The yarn that I use, although it's a superwash merino and nylon, it's really not very soft, which is actually all right, and I feel like it's going to felt a little bit over time. I got all the way through this sock, and then I measured how much I had left of my 100 grams of yarn, and I only had 40 grams left. So that means this sock weighs 60 grams, and I'm only going to be able to get 2/3 of the way through the next sock, and I'm going to run out of yarn. So that stopped me in my tracks a little bit. I have cast on the second sock in this pair, but I know I'm going to need to switch to a different yarn to finish it, and my dad's going to have a coloured toe. So, well, you live and you learn. I don't think he'll mind that much. So this other sock is currently on my needles, and I'm racing to finish it before Christmas. After I finished the first of my dad's socks, I decided to knit a pair of socks for my sister. This was exciting because this is my first ever toe-up sock, and I followed the Fleagle pattern from Fleagle's blog. So that includes information about the Jenny's Magic cast on at the toe there, which is a seamless cast on, which you don't have to sew up at the end, as well as the Fleagle heel, which is a toe-up heel with kind of no heel flap, I think is the word. It's just knit in two parts, so you increase for the gusset and then you turn and you do a massive heel turn on the way up. I also added a self-drafted DNA cable pattern, which I know my sister's going to love. And I had a blast knitting these. I love this really fun variegated yarn. I got to the top. I had a bit of trouble with the bind off on the socks. I kept binding it off too tight. So I had to learn a surprisingly stretchy bind off and do it really, really loosely with a size up needle. And it's given me this kind of patterned edge, which I don't actually mind. And when you're wearing it, you can't really tell. The problem I had with these socks was that I couldn't get these socks over my ankle the first time I knit them. I basically stretched the yarn to its absolute limit and I could just slip it on, but it was just not practical. And so I then knit a second sock using a modified heel of my own making. So I decided to increase more dramatically during the gusset and then decrease a little bit more dramatically to get rid of this extra stitches. And that just gave me a bigger heel, which didn't stretch so much and didn't distort this cable pattern around the foot. So I had to go back to my first sock and I had to do sock surgery. So that involved inserting needles above the heel and below the heel and then cutting the heel out, re-knitting from the foot part up, redoing the heel in the new style, and then grafting the new heel onto the old leg of the sock, which is a great skill to learn, but it did mean this took me forever because I almost essentially knit 3 socks. Then I think lucky last is the gift I knit for my mum. So this is a lace scarfette is what I'm calling it. It was taken from the Nihon Vogue pattern book, and I modified it slightly to reduce the width of the scarf, just to make it a bit skinnier because it was more of a shawl. And I knit it long enough to wrap around the neck twice and be wrapped like this as a little scarfette. I love this so much. The yarn is so soft. This was a bit of a blend of yarn, probably the nicest yarn I've ever used. It has cashmere in it, and I actually really enjoyed trying lace for the first time. So I love knitting this. It just did take forever. That's the theme of this year. So this ended up being, I think, 120 centimeters long, and I just kind of underestimated how long it might take me. So I was knitting on this at least an hour a day, and it still took me over 2 weeks. So I'm glad I started early because I've just recently finished it, and I love how it looks, but now I know scarves take longer than you think they will. So that's every project I've knit in the past 12 months of knitting. And something surprising I learned looking back at everything I knit this year is just how many of my knits were gifts. I'm pretty sure over half of what I knit this year was gifts, and I've learned I really love knitting and gifting things. But for next year, I think I'd like to focus a little bit more on some things for myself. I've also learned a heap of other things this year. So I found I love the feeling of wool. Wool was never really something that I sought out in my clothing before, and I certainly couldn't tell if something was wool. And now if I go to the op shop and I go through the secondhand clothes and feel them, I can actually feel when something is wool. I just love the way it feels to knit with it and to wear it, and how breathable it is. I actually struggle to wear synthetic clothes, especially tight-fitting clothes, because they really start to smell after a while. And I find that wool doesn't have that problem, which is awesome. In the past, I've always been really cold in the wintertime. Even if I had a big, thick cable jumper on, I felt like the wind went right through it, and I couldn't understand why. And now looking at those jumpers that I used to own from Zara and H&M, they're pretty much all acrylic jumpers, and they just don't offer the same warmth as, say, for example, this jumper that I knit does. Even though it's so much thinner, it's just heaps warmer. I also learned about local to me craft stores that I never even noticed before. There's a local grocery store right near me that I went to every day for 2 years, and just to the right of that shop is what I now realize is a craft and yarn store. I'm lucky enough to live between 2 local craft stores, and there's a third about a 20-minute drive away, so I do have some options. But before that, I really thought that the big chain stores in Australia, that's Sling Craft and Spotlight, were the only place to get yarn. And most of their offering is acrylic yarn, which I found I don't enjoy knitting with. And so it's really great to have learned about the local craft stores and the community initiatives that they sponsor and they support. Other than the physical stores near me, I've found that I really enjoy Bendigo Woolen Mills. So that's based in Victoria. But you can get it shipped anywhere in Australia for a really reasonable price, and they have a huge offering of wool and cotton and other natural fibre yarns in some nice, pretty varied colours. And they're just really reliable, so I'd recommend getting yarn from there if you can. I'm actually going to spend another day talking about the hobby I picked up of collecting yarn, and how I approached buying yarn this year, what it cost me, and what I would do differently going forward. In terms of techniques, I've come just a huge long way. I basically couldn't knit at all at the start of the year, so everything you see me knitting here, I had to learn how to do. I had to learn how to cast on, increase, decrease, split for sleeves, drop down and pick up stitches, had to do bind offs, I had to learn lace and cables and everything. So from the start, I've been pretty self-confident about learning new things, but now I'm actually confident that when I do, they'll look good also. I also learned how to dye yarn. I mentioned a few times that a lot of the yarn I bought was secondhand, and sometimes it's not exactly the colour that I wanted. So I picked up some wool dyes, and something that I've really enjoyed picking up as a hobby. This year I learned to try on as I knit. Too many times I was waiting for ages to try something on when I thought it wasn't right, and I could have just saved myself hours and hours of knitting. So try it on and don't be afraid to rip back and start again. If it's not right, you're losing a few hours now, but it's better than losing weeks or even months of your time later when you're not happy with it in the end. I learned that I love to be inspired by others. In particular, this year I learnt about knitting podcasts and some of my go-tos were NE Knits, Nora Knits and Two Pearls in a Pod, among many others. I also learnt about knit-alongs and something that they offer in particular that, say, knitting podcasts don't, which is the reciprocal relationship. You're known to other people in your knit-along group. They know about your progress, they know your goals and intentions, and that offers a sort of accountability that just watching others and being inspired by others doesn't. It was really cool to see everyone working on the same thing in different variations and to feel like you were part of a group and a club. And I just really enjoyed it. I even met a few people in my knit-along group who live in my city. And from there and from following them on Instagram, I found out about some local knitting events that I've now been to. So that's opened up a whole world to me that I didn't know about. I learned that knitting isn't always the easy Zen hobby that I thought it was going to be. It's really easy to get caught up in self-imposed timeframes and ideas of how you want something to turn out. If my past self, who wanted to crochet a beanie faster, could see just how long knitting actually takes, I maybe wouldn't have started at all. But the quality of the clothing and the pride that you get from wearing something that you've made is just unmatched. You need to be able to stay relaxed and stay focused through something that's going to take you a long time to do. It's a really mindful hobby, but deliberately mindful. It's not just something that is easy to do from the start. And I love that it's a craft that I can do while doing other things like listening to a podcast or watching TV. And as I went through the year and the weather got cooler, I thought that knitting might be a way to reclaim some sense of power over like seasonal depression and not enjoying the winter time. And that was definitely true. I was really looking forward to the weather cooling down so I could wear some of the things that I'd made. And the hobby was really enjoyable in the cooler months. So in that sense, it definitely worked. I found myself just a tiny bit sad for the first time ever when spring came around. I am definitely going to keep knitting into next year. I'm planning to spend a little bit more time another day to talk about what I am planning to do in my second year of knitting. If I could leave you with one piece of advice, it would be that almost nothing is as difficult as it seems, and that knitting is no exception. I find that too many people count themselves out of learning something new because they think they're not going to be able to do it or it looks too hard. But knitting is really a lot of very easy techniques strung together. Almost everything can be fixed, nothing is that serious. And you learn little bit by little bit, and at the end of the year you can end up with a pile of things that you've made. It's just string and needles, and really unless you sit on one it can't hurt you, so you don't need to be afraid. I really hope it was interesting and inspiring to some of you, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more in the future.